Imagine this. You wake up one morning, as you always do, but something feels different. It's subtle, so subtle that it might not be immediately apparent. Yet it gnaws at you, just beneath the surface of your awareness. The day unfolds, as it usually does, but there's a heaviness in the air, a quiet discomfort that you can't quite put your finger on. You go through the motions, coffee, emails, tasks, but the entire experience feels strangely disconnected. You're there, but you're not really there. You're living, but not truly alive. Something about your existence feels drained, hollow, as if all the vibrancy has been siphoned away. You smile at the right moments, laugh at the right jokes, speak when expected, but inside, there's a sense of quiet despair, a quietude that doesn't scream but settles into the bones like a slow, creeping fog. You try to ignore it. After all, you've got responsibilities, you've got things to do, and so you push it down. But even as you do, you feel the weight of it, the unspoken burden pulling at you. It's the kind of despair that doesn't scream or demand attention. It's the quiet kind, the one that slips through the cracks of your daily life, unnoticed by the world around you. You don't talk about it because, in some ways, you're not even sure it's real, but it's there, lurking in the spaces between your thoughts and actions. How many of us are walking around with this quiet despair, hidden beneath the facade of normalcy, smiling faces, and productive routines? How many of us are quietly falling apart, even as the world keeps turning, unbothered? The paradox here is this. Society tells us that despair is loud. It's the breakdowns that we can see, the emotional explosions, the dramatic meltdowns. We associate despair with visible suffering. But what if the real tragedy lies not in the obvious, but in the quiet? What if the true psychological crisis we face is not the one that shouts for help, but the one that goes unnoticed, hidden in plain sight? You've heard of depression, anxiety, loneliness, but what about quiet despair? It's not about being sad, it's about being stuck. It's not about feeling hopeless, but about losing the ability to even care enough to feel anything at all. It's the erosion of vitality, the slow extinguishing of passion. You're not in despair in the traditional sense. You're not in crisis, but you're dying in increments. What happens to us when we stop asking the big questions? What happens when we start accepting that this numbness is the way things are supposed to be? When did we learn to stop caring, to stop searching for meaning, to stop hoping for something more than this life of quiet, relentless monotony? It's the existential question that haunts every corner of modern existence. How did we become okay with this? The quiet despair isn't a sudden emotional collapse. It's a gradual process, like water wearing away stone. And if you're honest with yourself, you can feel it. The question is, though, how do you escape it? Or, more disturbingly, can you escape it? The problem with quiet despair is that it's easy to miss. It's not a loud cry for help. It's the absence of a cry altogether. You don't ask for assistance because you don't even realize you need it. There is no dramatic rock bottom to push you towards self-reflection or change. Instead, you live on in a kind of passive existence, aware that something is wrong, but never quite sure what it is. And here's the haunting truth. The more you let it slip by, the more it becomes a part of you. You start to think it's just who you are. But could it be something deeper? Could it be a symptom of a larger sickness, one that has crept into society and into our minds without us even realizing? This question doesn't just apply to you, or to your neighbor, or even to a few people you know. It applies to our entire culture. We live in an age where the quiet despair is spreading silently, unnoticed by the very people who are suffering from it. We've been taught to move forward, to ignore the whispers of discomfort, to keep building our lives without ever questioning the foundation upon which we're standing. And so we are left with people who exist, but don't live, who move, but don't feel. Why is it that so many of us have quietly accepted this? Why do we keep going, day after day, as if the absence of meaning is the new norm? The hidden tragedy of quiet despair lies in its ability to mimic normalcy. We believe it's a part of life. After all, isn't this how things are? Isn't this just what adulthood, responsibility, and modern life are supposed to be like? But as we begin to accept this as the status quo, we also begin to let go of something fundamental, something at the core of human experience: hope. Here's the truth. We can live for years in this quiet despair without ever realizing we are dying in small, incremental ways. And we can even convince ourselves that it's fine. But what if this is the very thing that is killing our spirit? What if it's not just a personal issue, but a societal one? What if quiet despair is the symptom of a larger cultural disease, one that has embedded itself so deeply into the fabric of our existence that we can no longer see it for what it truly is. What would it take to truly break free from this? To tear down the walls of numbness, to breathe life back into a soul long gone stale, to feel again. The road to understanding the true nature of quiet despair is not an easy one. It requires a deep dive into the parts of our psyche we rarely confront, and a brutal look at the world we've created for ourselves. And before we can find a way out, we need to understand the problem, the root of it, the very forces that perpetuate it. But that's a journey we must embark on together. You may be wondering, where does this quiet despair come from? Why do so many of us live as if we're sleepwalking through life, disconnected from the vibrancy we once sought? To answer this question, we need to take a long, hard look at the psychological and philosophical roots of human existence. The problem lies deeper than we think, intertwined with both individual psychology and the culture we've created. It's not just that people are losing meaning in their lives. It's that meaning itself has become something we no longer know how to find. Carl Jung once spoke of the collective unconscious, the shared psychological inheritance of humanity. He argued that there are forces within us, both personal and universal, that shape how we see the world and ourselves. Among these forces, perhaps the most significant is the shadow, the part of the self that we suppress, hide, or ignore because it's too uncomfortable to confront. This shadow is where our deepest fears, desires, and anxieties reside. But it's also the part of us that holds our potential for true growth, for self-actualization. The problem, Jung suggested, is that many of us fail to acknowledge our shadow. Instead of embracing the darker parts of ourselves, we deny them, leading to a fragmented self that feels incomplete and lost. Quiet despair often begins when we repress or deny those aspects of our being that we deem unworthy or unworthy of love. These unacknowledged parts of ourselves don't simply disappear. They fester in the dark corners of our psyche, quietly poisoning our sense of self-worth. In this sense, quiet despair isn't just a symptom of life's meaninglessness. It's a direct result of our unwillingness to confront the full scope of who we are. We live half-lives, split between the version of ourselves we show the world and the part we try to ignore. It's this division that leaves us feeling numb, disconnected, and ultimately unfulfilled. But this is only the beginning. The quiet despair that so many of us experience also has deep roots in philosophy, specifically in existentialism. The existential thinkers, from Jean-Paul Sartre to Friedrich Nietzsche, warned us of the dangers of living inauthentically, of not facing the true nature of our freedom, our isolation, and our mortality. Sartre, in particular, argued that we are condemned to be free, that our existence is marked by an overwhelming responsibility to create meaning in a world that offers none. This responsibility is both liberating and terrifying. When you are faced with the vast, open space of existence, the question is, what will you do with it? Will you create something meaningful, something that gives your life purpose? Or will you fill it with distractions, comforts, and hollow pursuits, anything to avoid confronting the existential void that waits at the edges of your consciousness? Most of us, Sartre argued, choose the latter. Instead of confronting the rawness of freedom, we create meaning through social roles, consumerism, and external validation. We live to fulfill expectations, rather than to discover or create our own path. In this process, we lose ourselves. We become trapped in the safe but shallow confines of convention, living as bad faith actors who follow scripts written for us by society, culture, and family. The quiet despair that so many of us experience is the result of living a life that lacks personal authenticity, a life driven by external pressures rather than internal values. Nietzsche, too, warned of the dangers of living without true purpose. His concept of the Übermensch, the overman, or superman, is often misunderstood, but at its heart, it is about transcending the herd mentality, rejecting the values imposed by society, and creating one's own meaning in life. Nietzsche argued that most people live under the tyranny of societal norms, religious doctrines, and moral systems that repress individuality and self-expression. We are conditioned to live for others, to live for approval, to live for fleeting pleasures. The result? Quiet despair, a gnawing feeling that, despite all our striving, we've never truly lived for ourselves. But if we are to take Nietzsche seriously, we must recognize that the quiet despair we experience isn't just the absence of joy or fulfillment. It's the consequence of not living authentically, of not striving to become the person we are capable of becoming. We exist, but we are not fully alive. Arthur Schopenhauer, whose bleak view of human nature resonates with many today, would argue that this quiet despair is inevitable, a built-in feature of human existence. Schopenhauer believed that human desire is the root cause of suffering. The more we want, the more we suffer, and the more we get what we want, the more we realize it doesn't bring lasting satisfaction. In Schopenhauer's worldview, quiet despair is not just a symptom of cultural decay or personal failure, it is the existential truth that life, in its deepest essence, is an endless cycle of striving and frustration. Schopenhauer's insight is sobering. Even when we get everything we think we want, it is never enough. We remain restless, dissatisfied, always yearning for something just beyond our grasp. In this sense, quiet despair isn't just a failure of society or psychology. It's the result of the human condition itself. And yet, Schopenhauer suggested that we can find a way out, not by getting rid of desire altogether, which is impossible, but by accepting that suffering is a part of life and by detaching ourselves from the constant need for fulfillment. Quiet despair, in Schopenhauer's view, can only be alleviated by learning to embrace the emptiness, to find peace within it, and to release the compulsive need to constantly seek something more. Aldous Huxley's Brave New World provides a chilling commentary on the way modern society exacerbates this quiet despair. In Huxley's dystopian vision, people are conditioned to accept a life of comfort and pleasure without ever confronting the deeper questions of existence. The result is not overt misery or rebellion, but a society of mindless, sedated people who have traded genuine human experience for the pursuit of pleasure. This, Huxley suggested, is the ultimate trap, the kind of quiet despair that comes not from suffering, but from the absence of meaningful struggle. People in the Brave New World are superficially content, but they are also spiritually empty. In modern society, we too live in a world full of distractions, constant entertainment, consumerism, and artificial comforts. We may not be living in a literal, brave new world, but we are certainly living in a world that encourages us to numb our discomfort, to drown out the quiet despair with momentary pleasures, superficial achievements, and the pursuit of status. But the more we ignore the existential void inside us, the deeper it grows. And yet, even in the midst of all this, a glimmer of possibility remains. The quiet despair you're feeling, no matter how much you try to push it away or distract yourself from it, has consequences far deeper than you might realize. Its effects are subtle but pervasive, gradually distorting how we perceive ourselves, how we interact with others, and how we approach life itself. When you begin to live in the shadow of quiet despair, a strange thing starts to happen. You begin to adapt, not in a healthy way, but in a way that helps you survive the emotional and psychological numbness that has settled into your life. You lose touch with the urgency of living authentically, and instead, you drift along, accepting the bare minimum of existence. The result is not only personal disillusionment but a distortion of society itself. Consider how the quiet despair manifests in your behavior. In the choices you make each day, you begin to make compromises, small ones at first, perhaps, but they accumulate over time. You choose comfort over challenge, convenience over growth, distraction over introspection. The things that once made you feel alive, passions, deep connections, creative pursuits, slowly fade into the background, overtaken by the pressing demands of daily survival and the hollow comforts that fill the void. This dynamic is psychological in nature, and it speaks to a profound imbalance within the human psyche. Psychologists call this learned helplessness, a state in which, after repeated exposure to stress or failure, a person eventually stops trying to change their circumstances, believing that their efforts will never matter. In the case of quiet despair, this learned helplessness is not the result of overt failure, but of the gradual erosion of motivation and purpose. The longer you live without confronting the underlying dissatisfaction in your life, the more you adapt to it, as if it is simply the way things are. The nagging sense of emptiness becomes so familiar that it no longer disturbs you, and eventually, it becomes invisible, even to yourself. This is one of the most dangerous consequences of quiet despair. You cease to question your existence. You settle for a life of mediocrity, convinced that there is no other option. You stop reaching for the things that might genuinely fulfill you, because you've come to believe that the search for meaning itself is pointless. But the problem is that, while you may no longer consciously feel the weight of this despair, it has infected every aspect of your life. You may think you're just getting by, but in truth, you're withering away bit by bit, day by day. The consequences of this numb existence go beyond just personal stagnation. The societal impact is also profound. When an individual becomes numb to their own existence, they begin to disengage from the world around them. They become less active participants in their communities, less passionate about the issues that shape society, and more apathetic toward the collective good. In the quiet despair of the individual lies a larger societal malaise, one where people no longer feel empowered to challenge the status quo, to speak up for justice, or to demand more from life. This isn't just an individual issue, it's a cultural one. We live in a society that rewards distraction and superficiality, that promotes consumerism as the path to happiness, and that provides endless entertainment to keep us from confronting the harder truths of existence. This environment cultivates quiet despair because it prioritizes convenience and comfort over meaning, depth, and connection. We're told that we can find happiness in material wealth, in consumption, in status, but these are all hollow pursuits that ultimately lead to more despair. When you build your life on the fragile foundations of external validation, you begin to feel a profound disconnection from yourself. You live in a world that is screaming at you to look outward for answers, yet no matter how much you consume, how much you achieve, you're left with an empty, gnawing sensation that nothing really matters. This is where the neurological aspect of quiet despair comes into play. The brain, as we know, thrives on novelty, challenge, and meaningful connection. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter associated with motivation and reward, requires stimuli that push us toward new and meaningful experiences. But when we settle into the routine of quiet despair, we stop seeking those things that genuinely excite us. Instead, we fall into patterns of passive consumption, scrolling endlessly through social media, binge-watching shows, seeking short-term pleasures that fail to fulfill our deeper needs. Over time, our brain's dopamine system adapts to this low-effort, low-reward pattern, and we become less and less capable of seeking out the meaningful, life-affirming experiences that we so desperately crave. This creates a vicious cycle. The more you disengage, the more your brain rewires itself to seek easier, less fulfilling rewards. And the more you turn to these superficial distractions, the less you are capable of finding real meaning. You become trapped in a feedback loop of numbness and emptiness. The quiet despair becomes self-perpetuating. In addition to this neurological rewiring, there are profound emotional consequences that stem from this kind of disconnection. As you lose the ability to engage deeply with life, you begin to lose touch with your own emotional truth. The feelings of discontent, dissatisfaction, and emptiness are there, but they are buried beneath a veneer of getting by. You stop recognizing the emotions that would otherwise guide you toward personal growth and self-transformation. Instead, you exist in a detached state, caught between the inertia of your routines and the deeper, unacknowledged yearnings for something more. As Viktor Frankl, the renowned psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, once wrote, "The greatest task for any human being is to find meaning in their life. Without that meaning, we are left with nothing but the hollow echo of existence." Frankl, who survived the horrors of a Nazi concentration camp, discovered that even in the most extreme suffering, people could find purpose through their attitude, their relationships, and their ability to confront suffering directly. Without meaning, we wither. Without purpose, we die in small, imperceptible ways. And when we are so removed from the real struggles of life, we lose the very essence of what it means to be human, the ability to create meaning even in the darkest of circumstances. The consequences of quiet despair, then, are not limited to feelings of sadness or apathy. They shape the very way we relate to ourselves, to others, and to the world around us. Quiet despair stunts our growth, numbs our capacity for joy, and forces us into a life of shallow, unfulfilled existence. It disempowers us, making us believe that change is impossible, that we are stuck in a world that doesn't care about our suffering. But what if it doesn't have to be this way? If the quiet despair you've been living with is the result of disconnection from your true self, from meaning, from purpose, then the path to breaking free must begin with reconnection. But here's the catch. Escaping the grip of quiet despair requires more than just a shift in perspective or a change in routine. It demands a radical transformation of how you see yourself and the world around you. You may think that breaking free from despair means simply overcoming your negative feelings, or that the solution is to be more positive, or find a new hobby. These are superficial fixes, band-aids for a deeper wound. To truly reclaim your life, you must first confront the underlying truths that are keeping you in this cycle. Only then can you begin the work of transformation, the work of truly reawakening your spirit. It starts with acknowledging that the despair is real, and that it is a symptom of something much larger than just a bad mood or a momentary phase. It's the existential crisis that arises when you've been living a life devoid of genuine purpose. The key here is to recognize that despair is not something that can be solved by escaping it. Rather, it's something that can be transcended by embracing it. Yes, you heard that right. Embracing the despair. Nietzsche's concept of amor fati, the love of fate, teaches us to accept our reality, no matter how painful or difficult, and to find meaning in it. The paradox of his philosophy is that by accepting the darkness, we can transform it into something powerful. The quiet despair you feel is not something to fight against or hide from. It is a part of you, a signal that your soul is craving meaning, depth, and authenticity. The moment you stop running from your despair and start facing it head-on, you reclaim a part of yourself that you've been ignoring. The act of confronting your despair is an act of rebellion not against life itself, but against the false narratives and distractions that society has imposed upon you. It is a rebellion against the culture of consumption, against the shallow expectations that tell you to be happy, busy, and productive at all costs. To truly break free, you must first step outside of the false security that these external markers of success provide. You must begin to define your own values, to listen to your inner voice, and to dare to live in a way that feels authentic to you. This is where Carl Jung's idea of individuation comes in. Jung believed that the process of individuation, the journey to becoming your true self, was a lifelong endeavor that required the integration of all aspects of your being, including the dark, shadowy parts that we tend to repress. To break free from quiet despair, you must begin the process of individuation. This means confronting the parts of yourself you've been avoiding, acknowledging your fears, desires, and limitations, and integrating them into a more whole and authentic version of yourself. It's a painful process, no doubt, but it's the only way to truly become the person you are meant to be. Here's the twist. The despair you feel is not a weakness. It is the very soil in which your personal growth will be rooted. Just as a seed needs the darkness of the earth to grow, so too does your soul need the despair and struggle of life to cultivate its strength, wisdom, and resilience. The road to freedom isn't one of avoidance or escape. It's one of confrontation and transformation. But how do you begin this process? How do you start living authentically, especially when everything around you encourages you to remain numb, distracted, and passive? The first step is to stop outsourcing your sense of purpose. For too long, you've let society, family, and external expectations define what you should care about. You've let the world tell you what success, happiness, and fulfillment look like. But these are hollow pursuits if they don't align with your own inner truth. The path to breaking free starts with defining your own meaning in life. Ask yourself, what do you truly care about? What is worth living for? What would your life look like if you stopped trying to meet the expectations of others and started living in alignment with your own values? The next step is to reclaim your agency. The existentialist philosophers, particularly Sartre, remind us that we are radically free. No matter how much we may feel constrained by circumstances, culture, or our own limitations, we always have the power to choose. This is the most terrifying and liberating truth about existence. You are the creator of your own reality. This doesn't mean that everything in life is within your control, but it does mean that you can control how you respond to life's challenges, how you interpret your experiences, and how you create meaning from your struggles. The moment you realize that you have this power, you will begin to see the world not as a series of obstacles to endure, but as a canvas upon which to create your own masterpiece. Of course, this doesn't happen overnight. Breaking free from quiet despair requires time, courage, and patience. It means taking small, intentional steps each day toward a more authentic existence. It means finding the courage to say no to things that drain you, to let go of toxic relationships or careers that don't serve you, and to embrace the discomfort of doing things differently. It means seeking out challenges that push you to grow, rather than remaining in the safety of the familiar. But perhaps the most profound shift comes when you stop seeing despair as a problem to be solved and start seeing it as an opportunity to grow. The great secret of overcoming despair is not to avoid or deny it, but to use it as a catalyst for transformation. In every moment of suffering, there is the potential for reinvention. In every instance of despair, there is the possibility of a new beginning. And finally, as you embark on this journey of self-reclamation, remember that you are not alone. There are countless others who are struggling with the same quiet despair, who are yearning for the same sense of meaning, connection, and authenticity. This is not just your personal fight, it's a collective one. The more we begin to acknowledge our quiet despair, the more we create the possibility for true change not just in ourselves, but in the world around us. In the end, the rebellion you are waging is not just against the forces that seek to numb you, but against the quiet despair that threatens to keep you from living fully. The road is long, but with each step you take, you reclaim more of yourself. And with every bit of self-reclamation, You begin to see the world around you in a new light, one that is rich with possibility, depth, and meaning. By now, you may have started to notice something crucial. The journey out of quiet despair isn't a linear one. It's a winding path, full of unexpected turns and profound realizations. Each step you take forces you to confront your own limitations, your fears, your desires, and the very fabric of your existence. It is, as Nietzsche put it, a path of becoming, a process of constant transformation. But there is one truth, one final revelation, that will change everything. It is the truth that has been lurking in the background all along, waiting for you to truly see it. This truth will change how you understand despair, how you understand yourself, and how you understand life itself. Here it is. The despair you've been running from, the despair you thought was the end, is actually the doorway to your liberation. That's right. Quiet despair, in its rawest form, is not something to fear or avoid. It is not a sign that something is broken, that you have failed, or that life is inherently meaningless. Quiet despair is, in fact, the beginning of your awakening. It is the moment when you are forced to confront the truth of your existence in its most naked form. It is the moment when everything you thought you knew about yourself and the world begins to unravel, and in that unraveling, something new is born. This realization is not just psychological, it is deeply philosophical. It cuts to the core of what it means to be human. We are, as existential philosophers like Sartre and Heidegger have shown, beings toward death. We are finite creatures, caught in the tension between what is and what could be. And the only way to truly embrace life, to embrace freedom, is to face the fact that life is always fragile, always uncertain, and always, in a sense, unfinished. Quiet despair is the existential abyss that lies between who we are and who we could be. It is the space between the life we have been handed and the life we could create. In this sense, it is a gift, albeit a painful one, because it forces us to confront the truth of our freedom. It demands that we stop living for others and start living for ourselves. It calls us to strip away the false comforts and distractions, to peel back the layers of societal conditioning, and to ask the question, what am I really here for? This realization, this moment of true self-awareness, can be utterly disorienting. It's like waking up from a long sleep, only to find that the world you thought you knew is not what it seems. But it is also the moment when everything begins to shift. Once you realize that despair is not a sign of failure, but a doorway to your transformation, you begin to see that the suffering of life is not something to avoid but something to embrace. This may sound counterintuitive. After all, doesn't it feel like despair is something to escape, something that makes life unbearable? In the short term, yes. But the key is that this kind of despair is not the end, it's the beginning. It's a call to action, a signal that the old ways of living no longer serve you. It's the opportunity to shed your old skin, to emerge as a new version of yourself, one that is no longer tethered to the false promises of a life lived for others, or for external approval, or for superficial success. The most profound truth is this: the deeper the despair, the greater the potential for growth. When you are at your lowest, when the weight of the world feels unbearable, that is when you are closest to your truest self. It is when you are stripped bare of illusions and distractions that the core of your being is revealed. And from this raw, vulnerable place, you have the power to create a life of meaning, one that is uniquely your own. It's in these moments of quiet despair, when everything seems lost, that the seeds of true freedom are planted. The key is to stop seeing despair as a problem to solve, but as a signal to live more authentically. Stop treating it like an enemy, and start viewing it as a guide. The paradox here is that, by embracing the full reality of your despair, you will begin to see the world with fresh eyes. You will realize that your freedom is not just a theoretical concept, it is a tangible, immediate reality. You are free to create meaning in your life, free to define your values, free to live with intention and purpose. At the same time, you will also come to understand that the despair you feel is universal. It is not a unique affliction but a shared human experience. Quiet despair is the underside of joy, the shadow of meaning. It is not something that sets you apart from others, but something that connects you to the vast web of human suffering and triumph. You are not alone in this journey. Everyone, at some point, must face their own quiet despair and decide how they will respond to it. In this way, quiet despair becomes a unifying force. It is not a burden to bear in isolation, but a shared experience that calls us to solidarity. It reminds us that we are all grappling with the same questions, the same fears, the same yearnings. And in this shared struggle, we find our true humanity not in the absence of suffering, but in our ability to transcend it, to create meaning from it, to emerge from it stronger and more alive. So what now? The final realization is this: The choice is yours. You can continue to live in the numbness of quiet despair, perpetuating the cycle of distraction and resignation. Or, you can choose to see despair as an invitation to create something new, to transcend the life you've been living, and to build a future that aligns with your deepest values and desires. You can choose to live authentically, to face the discomfort of life's uncertainties, and to create meaning where none existed before. The ultimate truth is this: despair, when embraced, is not the end of your story, it is the beginning of something far greater. When you step into the fullness of who you are, when you embrace the struggle of existence, you will realize that the quiet despair you once feared was, in fact, the crucible through which your truest self has emerged. And in that emergence, you will find a depth of meaning and connection that is impossible to achieve without facing the very abyss that once threatened to consume you. The question now is, what will you do with your freedom? This journey is yours to take. The choice is always yours.